We're in this together, an interdisciplinary exploration of the coronavirus pandemic. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this special course. I'm overwhelmed by the response. Here at Ohio Wesleyan, we are known for small classes, often with maybe a dozen or 15 students. So this is quite different for us. More than 800 people are now registered for this class. Students, alumni, faculty members, staff members, Lifelong Learning Institute participants in the Delaware community, other residents of Delaware and Central Ohio, and others from across the country. There are 25 members of the Ohio Wesleyan faculty who have worked together in short order to develop this course in preparation for all of you. And I'm so deeply impressed with the work of all of our faculty. In the last 7 weeks, our faculty have worked in very quick order to move to remote instruction for our students. And we've recently received information with a survey from our students reflecting on how well they have been served by the faculty in the time of this pandemic and how well the time of remote teaching instruction has gone for them, though they have noted many times over how much they wish they were on campus and how they look forward to returning to campus and to the nature of instruction that they value most, being with small groups of students in a classroom with a member of the Ohio Wesleyan faculty. The faculty who are with us today are giving their time, their expertise, and their hard work to create this course on this pandemic that is upending and in many ways defining our world, not only now, but for the years to come. And as they came together to plan this course, they insisted that it should be free and open to the world. So we're happy that you are a part of it. You're so very fortunate. For over the next 10 weeks, you'll have the opportunity to experience the compelling teaching of our faculty, the teaching that our students experience every day in classrooms, in laboratories, in studios, in their offices, in travel learning courses that take them together all over the world, and for the past 5 weeks in settings like this, often in front of a computer with a Zoom camera. Many of you even have the opportunity to participate in small discussion groups later this week. I hope that those will be meaningful for you as well. And for everyone, I encourage you to share your questions, your comments, and your ideas on the Facebook group page that we've created for this class. We're so very fortunate to have you with us, but most of all, we're so very fortunate to have the talented and dedicated work of the Ohio Wesleyan faculty, and you'll be able to experience that for yourself over the course of these 10 weeks. Unfortunately, I will have to leave this opening session in a few moments, but I'll be watching the recording of it and looking forward to further sessions as the course continues to develop. But without taking more of your time today, I'm very pleased to turn the microphone and the camera over to this distinguished panel and to today's moderator, Dr. Ashley Biser, Associate Professor of Politics and Government. Dr. Biser.
Thank you, President Jones. It's my pleasure today to convene our first meeting and to welcome 3 distinguished members of the Ohio Wesleyan faculty to talk a bit about the course and what we hope to accomplish in it. Before we begin, I'd like to offer an acknowledgement of the Indigenous people who cared for the land where we live and work at Ohio Wesleyan. Our town's name comes from the Delaware, who call themselves the Lenni Lenape. Today, Central Ohio is home to many Native peoples who belong to the Lakota, Cherokee, Navajo, Seneca, and other nations. We acknowledge and thank the Indigenous people of Central Ohio, and we look forward to nurturing relationships of mutual respect and learning. It's in the spirit of mutual respect and learning that we start our journey together. At Ohio Wesleyan, we believe that the events of the past few months have brought into stark relief the complexity and the interconnectedness of the world in which we live. Even in a time of social distancing, we crave connection and the ability to think through complex problems together. It's our contention that we can't understand what's happening to us unless we learn from experts in many different fields. Only with our combined knowledge can we find ways to craft a better future. My name is Ashley Biser, and I'm an Associate Professor of Politics and Government at Ohio Wesleyan. My adult life has been devoted to the study of democracy and to understanding how people with vastly different experiences of the world can come together to make decisions that are in the interest of everyone. I find myself here because I too am craving the opportunity to hear from my colleagues, to understand how they're making sense of the pandemic from their own disciplinary perspectives. I'll be moderating today's panel as well as our final discussion that looks at the kind of future we want to build once our current crisis has passed. So now on to our panelists. I'm pleased to have Ellen Arnold, who's an associate professor of history, Sean Quay, the Robson Professor of Politics and Government, and Randy Quay, Professor of Black World Studies with us. So to begin, I'm going to start by asking them to tell us a little bit about themselves and what they study. We'll have time for a few questions at the end, so please share any questions that you have via the chat functions. So Ellen, we'll start with you. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, President Jones. I want to reiterate the sentiment of how exciting it is to be a part of this multidisciplinary, multiple perspectives course. I come at this course from the context of an environmental historian. I have spent my adult life studying the ways that humans have interacted with nature, the ways that nature gives humans opportunities, sets contexts, creates contingencies within which we live and work and build our societies. I'm particularly interested in the Middle Ages. I teach medieval history here at Ohio Wesleyan. And in a crazy twist of fate, I am currently in the final stages of teaching a class on the Black Death. Our students have really had a chance to experience firsthand the ways that having a sense of the complexities of past human relationships with nature mirror our own lived experiences. So.
Thank you. Dr. Quay, can you please tell us a little bit about where you're coming from?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sean Quay. I am the director of the International Studies program at Ohio Wesleyan, and I also am a professor of politics and government. I first got sort of focused on the issue of the risk of pandemic when I was working as a fellow at the Institute for National Strategic Studies in Washington, which advises the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Office of Secretary of Defense on emerging security challenges. So I've since done 3 editions of a textbook on global security that emphasizes a lot of exactly this kind of challenge and threat. And I teach a course called Global Issues, where we've been talking about this stuff certainly since 9/11, if not before. So I'm really privileged to do this, and it's a great honor to be doing this with my colleagues here at Ohio Wesleyan. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Quay.
Thanks for having me this afternoon. I am Arnold Quay, director of the Black World Studies program at Ohio Wesleyan. This particular topic is dear to my heart because I have been working in the area of healthcare for so many years. I have at least done some work in Europe, looking at the different healthcare systems and how they impact different communities. I've also done some work looking at healthcare among African Americans. And 3 years ago, I was fortunate to direct the SIGA National Colloquium on Global Health. And in fact, one of the areas that we talked about was really whether we are prepared for any new emerging infectious disease. So for me, this is timely, and I look forward to hearing what my other colleagues have to say and share with us on this broader topic.
So can you tell us a little bit about why you think it's so important to study COVID-19 from multiple perspectives? Obviously, we've all been watching the news and listening carefully to medical professionals and to doctors. So Dr. Arnold, why does listening to a historian matter?
Well, for one thing, we tell very good stories. That seems a bit glib, but in fact, I think that one of the skills that historians offer is the ability to shape a sense of understanding that past people were people with stories and lives and communities and complex ways of, and often contradictory ways of seeing the world. And that as we look back to other people and other communities and for comfort, for knowledge, for help, one of the things that we do as historians is not only tell the stories of the past, but look at the way that people of the past told stories for the future so that we could understand our worlds by looking at the ways they understood theirs.
Dr. Quay, what do political scientists know that we should be listening to?
Well, I think I'd step back a little further even, and I mean, we're all going to foreshadow lectures that are coming that we'll get a lot more into detail on, of course. So political science, of course, I would fit in. I mean, I don't think you can really understand political science without understanding a wide range of interdisciplinary elements that go into the political ecosystem, if you will, of our lives, right? So, but if we think about things like national security, a lot of people have argued for a long time that we have to have a broader concept of what are challenges and threats, right? But I think about the liberal arts as being so critical because it's not really about a political thing at all. I mean, a lot of people misunderstand that phrase. It's about challenging assumptions and bringing together interdisciplinary teams to solve problems. And that is the exact nature of the world that we find ourselves living in. But I would go back even, and I borrow a story from history to close that out. In 1957, we had the Sputnik crisis, right? And many people watching will remember that even. They lived through it. It was very scary. It was an existential threat to America, all Americans, everyone, right? But when President Eisenhower responded to that, he didn't say we should be afraid or divide people. In fact, what he said was that we're going to need science and we're going to need a whole bunch of investment in education. But critically, he said, we're not just going to need the Einsteins. We're also going to need the Emersons. Emerson was a transcendental poet. What does that have to do with national security? Everything, because it gives us the context, the breadth to understand things, to better explain things, and better find the places we can all come together on agreement and move ourselves as a society, a nation, and a world forward. And that's what the liberal arts provide. So that's why I think this is so critical an opportunity for everyone involved, but especially for us also to hear from everyone who's out there, because everyone who's out there also brings these great perspectives and we all have a chance to learn in that process.
Dr. Quay, can you tell us a little bit about the kinds of questions that are being asked in your discipline?
Coming from Ghana and also having studied in both Canada and the United States, I do bring a unique perspective to a general discussion on a topic like health. In looking through what others are looking at, for instance, one central question that people have posed, and which I think is really something that we need to talk about, is why in some areas do people refer to COVID-19 as a Chinese virus? It seems to me that the mere reference to that elicits different responses. And there are some commentary that suggests that Chinese Americans or people of Asian descent are being attacked simply because of this particular virus. And I think looking at an issue like this from multiple perspectives allow us to be able to see how all of these factors come together, and that knowledge is not the reserve or preserve of one particular group, or it's not the preserve of one particular discipline, and that interdisciplinary approaches in terms of linking all the different perspectives together, in terms of history, in terms of politics, in terms of sociology, in terms of other kinds of studies, allow us to be able to understand and appreciate some of the diversity and also the different approaches that one can take. Because after all, diseases are not limited by national boundaries. We are all impacted by what's going on. And having a broader perspective allows us to be able to know what the issues are and to come up with tangible solutions that will help us deal with this particular situation. And in fact, one question that people are asking, for instance, is why and how is this particular pandemic disproportionately affecting different groups, the elderly and minorities and people who happen to live in urban centers or on reservation. And I think to answer that question requires us to be able to develop these different different approaches to be able to answer those questions. And that's why for me, the liberal arts education offers us a window into understanding some of these broader issues.
Dr. Arnold, can you tell us a little bit more about your research on the Black Death, and what are some of the lessons that we can learn from that for today?
Sure. And I actually wanted to jump off of something that Professor Quay just said when he was talking about how important it is to look at the structures and patterns of the ways that different peoples are affected. And one of the things that I think that studying the past pandemics and also other past disasters, natural disasters in particular, but also human-induced disasters. One of the things that disasters let us do as historians often is they expose the underbelly of a society. They let you sort of turn it inside out and see the structures that are in place. And so disasters, as horrible as they are for the people who live through them, can help us see the invisible social and gender and racial and religious and economic structures, and help us see the assumptions that people bring with them into their worlds. And as historians, it's really exciting, therefore, when you get a disaster. Which sounds so strange, but my students get used to me saying with excitement, and then really bad things happened. The Black Death is an exciting thing to research and an exciting thing to teach about and to study in the classroom, because on the one hand, it is so completely different from our world. 1340s Europe is so different. And so we get a step of remove. We get to watch it from a very, well, until this semester, a very safe distance. But then, because it's a response to disease, because it is a response to the unknown, because it was unpredictable and unexpected, and all of the people caught up and swept up in the disease, we're just, as one of my students said this semester, we're just people. You kind of see the continuities of human response: good, bad, indifferent, hopeful, fearful, generous, greedy. You get to see the whole panoply of human responses to disease. And so that interplay of difference and similarity is what makes it so exciting.
Dr. Quay, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the ways in which past emergencies and disasters have influenced global security, and how countries have been able to work together?
So again, picking up on what Professor Arnold just said, part of the learning from history also requires the ability not just to put things in context, but to be able to effectively put forward facts in a way that allow decision makers to prioritize well, okay? And I think this is relative to Randy's point too, because what anyone thinks about China, that doesn't excuse the lost time that we had in this country over the last few months. Because we've had people warning. I have a long quote here from a study from 2001, Gary Hart and Warren Rudman, a bipartisan commission, where they warn about how we're falling behind in science, right? And understanding these things. And we've known about this for some time, but you know, experts were warning about Vietnam. Experts were warning about invading Iraq. Experts were warning about terrorism and what was coming that could have happened, like 9/11. And experts have been warning about virus pandemic for as long as I've been working in this field. So one of the challenges I think that we all have is recognizing that for some reason, you know, these kind of things haven't been fully decked in terms of prioritization. And so part of what I hope that this course yields is just as citizens, you know, how can we play a role in helping shape that debate, and in critically we've also seemed to have somehow lost our path in the ability to have an effective debate that is open and respectful and begins with a sense of empathy for where people come from. And I don't just mean their backgrounds, but where their ideas come from and worldviews come from too, because we all have to figure out how we can come together and identify, again, key priorities. And that becomes critical because then that helps you align your budgets and, you know, other things, right? And so, again, you know, what's kind of tricky is that, you know, we are a country that did the Berlin airlift. We're a country that went to the moon. We did the internet after Sputnik and things like that, right? So we should be able to ramp up testing and ramp up swabs and be able to get this done and be a leader and a model for the world. But I do think it's fair to say, if we're being self-aware, the world isn't really looking to America right now for leadership. My aspiration is that all of us together provide that leadership and that model and that example of how we can have a good, respectful discussion, bring people together, and then have good plans going forward.
One of the things that's really stood out for me lately is the fact that we're dealing with something that we frequently talk about, and Dr. Arnold mentioned, we talk about it in terms of a natural disaster. And yet what we know is that natural disasters are never simply natural, and that in political science, it's almost a truism that while you know, droughts, things like that can be natural disasters, the impacts of those are political problems. And so a famine, for instance, is a political problem and not just a natural disaster. And go ahead.
I would add to that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I would add very quickly. I mean, experts were warning for decades about the levees in New Orleans. I mean, for decades, we knew about this. Like, everyone knew about this. And the hurricane was a week away, right? And it wasn't like we didn't have time to even prepare for that. And this was after 9/11, right? And where was FEMA? You know, so these are the kind of things that Professor Arnold is exactly right, because we not only can, we must learn from these kind of things, but it requires examining them, opening them up, being critical, looking at them from a diverse array of perspectives, and also challenging our own assumptions too, going forward. You know, and that's hard to do, right? That's not an easy thing to do. But maybe sometimes that's why opening up something by Ralph Waldo Emerson might lead us a little further down that road, because it opens up those creative processes.
Dr. Quay, oh, Dr. Arnold.
Sorry, and then I'll hand it over to Professor Quay again. One of the things that Dr. Quay just said that resonates with part of why I think it's important to look further back in history, to look beyond our history, to look beyond America and beyond modernism, is this sense that knowledge and understanding and science and brains and logic are not the preview, are not like limited to modernity, and that past people, as tempting as it is to see ourselves as somehow the best at everything, recognizing that we knew about Katrina and didn't do anything, that we had all of this knowledge and didn't act, this helps us look back at the past and not see, oh, they didn't solve this, and so therefore they were ignorant. If we look back at the past and see, wow, look at all the questions they had, look at all the things they had to figure out, look at all the decisions they made about how to solve this, it helps us see that for us, it's going to have to be a process too. We're not just going to know things. We have to know things and act on them, and know things and make decisions.
And as somebody emailed before we got together, somebody raised the question of, you know, we all collectively as citizens can be reading and studying about the Spanish flu, right? And there's a lot to learn from that. Absolutely, you know, so that's even, you know, that's not more modern, but that's recent history, but it's really critical to understanding where we're at right now, what happened in these prior dynamics for sure.
Dr. Quay, can you talk a little bit about how various healthcare systems have fared in our current crisis?
Okay. Thank you for the question. I do believe that globally, some countries are doing better than others. Obviously, what I'm really worried about is really what it will do for health systems in developing countries like mine in Ghana, for instance, because currently the system is overstretched. We don't have enough beds per capita. The financing part of it is also a major problem to the extent that countries that rely on resources, for instance, Nigeria, depends almost 60% of its revenue comes from oil. And given the prices of oil, it, in a sense, has made it very difficult for them to be able to generate the needed resources to be able to meet this challenge. If you look at Europe, given the fact that they already have national health systems, the impact, I think, is not going to be as severe as one would expect because everyone is covered. No one has to deal with problems of being uninsured and therefore not having access to the healthcare system. So I do believe that some of these European countries are further ahead in terms of trying to address this particular problem. In the US, I think we are doing well, but we still have a long way to go to the extent that we still have somewhere around 12% of our population who are currently uninsured. The difficulty that we also have is that some of the states where you have greater concentration of minorities are also the states that never took on Obamacare. So you tend to see a large number of uninsured population in some of these states. And I was actually reading an article published in the New England Journal of Medicine that was talking about healthcare to people on native lands. And one of the arguments being raised was the distance, that most of them actually have to travel on the average about 50 miles to get to the closest hospital or clinic. And once they get there, they don't have the resources. And that to some extent becomes a further burden on that particular, on that community as well. So I guess what I would suggest, and what I would encourage our governments and our leaders to do is look for ways to try to ensure that everyone who is sick can have access to the healthcare system. Obviously, they do currently through the emergency room, but that is not a sufficient way in which to access healthcare. The other issue that I think is also important is to tap into community-based initiatives. For instance, in most of these communities, the churches are available. There are a lot of other kinds of civic organizations that can also be used, not only to disseminate information or to communicate to others what we need to do in terms of washing our hands, maintaining the kind of physical distance that we need to. But as of my colleagues have also suggested, we need to have and ramp up testing so that people will have easy access to this kind of testing to know whether they are infected or not, and if they are, to be able to quarantine and to have the kinds of resources that they will need.
So we're getting some questions in about what we can do about some of the differential impact that COVID-19 has had on different communities. So what are some of the ways that we can work back against some of the kind of discriminatory language that you've talked about, Dr. Quay, or what are some of the lessons that we can learn about how we can work together as opposed to pitting people against each other?
I think one approach, as I was mentioning, is really tapping into existing community initiatives. In most communities, there are ways in which some of this information can be communicated. We probably need to set up a whole team of individuals who can visit homes, try to find out what people are doing, and ultimately people need to be able to have access to food. I look at and watch the TV and I see all these long lines of people out of food, out of work, but most importantly also not having access to food. And I think as a nation, it's a disgrace that we have a situation where people are going hungry. And part of what I think we need to do is to double our effort to make sure that people can have easy access to food. And if that means shelving, put more food in food pantries or shelves, that will be one way by which we can at least in immediate circumstances address the needs of people who are suffering under this current circumstances. The other point that I've raised earlier on is pretty much we have to rethink how we approach healthcare in this country. And that to the extent that we still have people who don't have access to health insurance makes our problem more difficult to manage. And that is something that I think when this is all over, there should be a further national debate about health systems, and they need to be able to ensure that individuals have access to basic health care.
Dr. Quay?
So just to pick up on that a little bit, first of all, on the food issues, one of the things that this has revealed is the food delivery supply chains in this country. A lot of that is immigrant labor. And so we've been having this big debate. Now all of a sudden we're all realizing, hey, wait a minute, we're all dependent on that, right? So we're going to have a more sophisticated discussion of this, right? Because we're now realizing things that we just took for granted, I think, as a nation for a long time. But that said, also, not a disagreement, but just an add-on. I think when we look at places like if we say Europe, right, that doesn't tell us a whole lot. Like Italy's in a bad way for sure, of course, obviously. But Germany's in a pretty good way. America has been very inconsistent. Crisis management leadership. Lesson number one is don't be inconsistent. Be straight on, be factual, be consistent, so people have a high level of trust and a sense that they know what to do, right? But if we say, oh, America is not doing great, but we can also look at pockets of America, in particular Ohio, which I believe has done an outstanding job. And I believe Ohio has been a model for the country and for the world. And so when I get calls from friends in Georgia asking me things like, what's going on in my state, I would advise them to pay attention to their CDC and listen very careful to their local officials. That's all I would do. But take a look at Ohio, because every step of the way, in my assessment, they've handled this very, very rightly. And I don't know why, but Governor DeWine, I know he has spent some time in Haiti doing relief work and things like that, and they've had outbreaks in Haiti. So maybe that's something that's been helpful to him, getting his head around this, right? But again, getting out there, doing those service things, getting our hands dirty in life, right? These are the challenges. But I just wanted to make sure that we also, if we're being critical of America, we can also look at pockets of America which have been outstanding. And in my assessment, Governor DeWine has been a model for the country and the world. So we can all quibble about lots of little things, but the way they've done this has been exceptionally good. And particularly Dr. Amy Atkin has received superhero status in our state, and I think rightly so.
Dr. Arnold?
Well, both of my colleagues brought up food security, and that might seem at first to be second to death by virus or illness. Food security is one of the things that is often in history kind of shown to be incredibly important in times of disaster and in times of disease. And I think that one of the, not at the risk of making everything about the Black Death, one of the things that happened in the wake of the first major wave of pandemic in medieval Europe in 1347 to 1348 is that so many people died that there were not enough people to harvest the crops. And so the food system was radically disrupted, and the resilience of the agricultural ecosystem, the agricultural economy and the agricultural network was extremely tested, and it forced both workers and landholders to really reevaluate their goals, their agendas, and the ways that they maintained the daily stuff of life. And I think that that's when we look to the past and see other people wrestling at an even more tremendous scale with these problems that we're all experiencing ourselves, with the daily fabric of life being kind of suddenly upended because of the absence of people. In our case, luckily, because we're staying home, not because 50% of us died. Yeah, that helps us again see these underpinnings. And I'm excited to hear from our colleagues later in the course about food studies issues and food systems and food networks.
A few of our listeners, our watchers, whatever, our community members are asking if you could talk a little bit about how political elites are interacting with scientific information, sort of generally and as it relates to COVID-19. And I think this is a question that I find really interesting, right? Because we operate in, at least in the United States, in the context of a democratic system where everybody's votes are supposed to be equal, right? And so everyone is sort of on the idea of a democracy is that we operate on a level playing field. But obviously when we start thinking about scientific expertise, there are people who know more than others and whose opinions we might want to listen to more than others. And there are two very different modes of thinking about knowledge and thinking about how we interact with the world when you bring science into a democratic context and democracy to science. And so I was wondering if any of you would want to talk a little bit about what you think about how our political elites are interacting with scientific information.
Well, I'll jump in on that. I think it's a mixed bag. I think at the state level for the governors, many, has been absolutely outstanding. I'm not going to waste time here talking a lot about the way the White House has been organized on this. I mean, I don't even, everyone's been arguing about whether he said something about Lysol or not. And if that's what we're arguing about, we are absolutely wasting our time. So that's just generally not the best approach. But Dr. Fauci, I think people who follow this stuff know that there's very few better experts on these issues in the world than Dr. Fauci. So when he speaks, my ears go up very high. But I think that it is fair to say that for a long time, I've thought of science and technology and politics as being like two trains, but on two very different tracks, and just not linking up the cars together. So these debates about climate change, scientists sometimes will come in and hammer people and say, don't do A, B, C, or D, but we're also talking about people and their local cultures and traditions and backgrounds and religion. So we have to go and talk about these things, again, with empathy and our ears wide open and listen to what people have to say and give them the space they need to come to their own view. And then we can have a really good discourse that starts with a sense of empathy and trying to achieve understanding. But I'll also tell you, I mean, as people who study these things, if we see a state that isn't even following the guidelines put out by the president, moving too fast, their experts, will tell you very quickly that increases all of our risk for ongoing economic catastrophe well into maybe even next year. And the experts are telling us that can also almost guarantee a second wave of this, maybe in July, maybe in the fall. So now really is a time to listen carefully to experts, but people should be, discerning about their expertise that they listen to too, and ask challenging questions, all the time. It's important to do. We are all sifting through this. And also what may be true one day is not necessarily going to be true the next day. So we're going to have to be flexible and have open minds and open hearts. But also sometimes for experts, it can be frustrating because you're talking about this, but it's almost like you're debating whether gravity exists or not, as I heard someone say on CNN the other day. But bottom line is, we're going to have to really be patient too, as we do the reopening. But the other thing experts tell us, this will end. Okay, there is an end to this. Okay, and that end will come so much faster and better for all involved if we're very careful and patient right now.
Dr. Arnold, go ahead. Dr. Arnold.
Oh, okay. I could let Randy go first.
No, go ahead.
So one of the questions that environmental historians struggle with, this is environmental history cap rather than medieval, is how to understand human relationships and cultural relationships with scientific expertise and with local expertise in ecosystems. And I think that a lot of our modern skepticism about expertise, there are many people, if you say someone is an expert or listen to experts, their hackles go up. And it's easy to find that frustrating. But if you listen to that, if you bear in mind community stories about times in which experts have done wrong have attacked communities, the Tuskegee experiments. There's all sorts of examples in which experts have had malicious intent and communities remember and talk about that. And so one of the things environmental, and also in instances of colonialism and government land grabs and the imposition of modern states onto lands and landscapes and onto peoples, that lots of voices get artificially muted and experts are seen as only those with credentials and degrees and officialness. And so history also environmental history teaches us that the resistance to experts is complicated and often rooted in communal stories of misuse, but that also scientific and government and political elite need to be a lot more cautious about not trampling on local and community expertise. And in our case, that probably comes in how your community is managed, right? A federal government can come in and say, this is the blanket solution, but it's not going to work in every community because of its own stories, its own history. So I think that's one of the interesting expertise problematic things that environmental history and history of science show us is that expertise is complicated.
Yeah, I do agree with the point that my colleague just made. And in fact, there is a historical understanding about science, the use of science, and science being used as a tool for public policy. So to the extent that there's a history to that, one is reminded of a book that I read by Jay Gould, titled A Mismeasure of Man. In that book, he documents how scientific knowledge was used in different ways. So the point that Sean Quay is making is that we need to find a medium where knowledge and science can match up with political aspirations. And I think it requires a system of government that is more open, that is more decentralized, that allow people to have a voice. That I think will be the way in which science knowledge can be used to benefit.
And I would be the first to add as a professor that the smartest and wisest people I've ever known went to high school and that was the end of their degree. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so there's no guarantee of wisdom. We all need to be in this together, literally. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this and we're going to do all these lectures because we all want to learn. You know, this is all part of the process. That's why we do what we do.
And I think this question about what constitutes expertise and who gets to know the best about what works in any particular community or particular situation is a really important question. I'm getting a lot of questions here about sort of where we go from here. How do we create a different future? What will we learn from this crisis? And obviously that's sort of the point of the whole course. So we don't want to give away too much. And the point of the course is also that we can't figure that out just by, you know, one or two of us talking, or three of us talking with each other, but that we need to listen to people who have all different kinds of expertise. So I'll put out a little plug here for Dr. Lori Anderson, who's going to be speaking on Wednesday. And she is a professor in our botany and microbiology department. And so she's going to be talking about the ecology of the pandemic. So just a little bit of a preview there. But I think another question then to put to our panelists is, you know, what do you hope that we learn from this, or what are you learning, since it's hard to have sort of a final encapsulation there?
I do think that for me, it's really an opportunity for me to listen to what other people are saying about the whole pandemic, using their own perspective in terms of their own training. That for me is a very important thing. The second is this, unlike other forms of diseases, this is communicable disease. So to the extent that people get it, whether you do the right thing or not, forces us to be a little bit cautious about how we treat others within the broader context of our society. And then third, I think we have to really think about best practices because this is not, obviously this form of virus is new, but we have gone through Ebola, there was the SARS outbreak and H1N1 outbreak. And in both situations, I think the global community through the WHO worked very hard to try to nip this in the bud. And I think moving forward, this is the approach that we should continue taking because that's the only way we can ensure that we end this pandemic.
Dr. Arnold?
So I think that from my perspective as not only an environmental historian, but as someone who studies the distant past, who studies the early Middle Ages, I think one of the things that this pandemic is forcing, allowing me to do, I'm not sure which of those it is yet. I really try to always emphasize in my classroom, and I'll talk about this a bit more next Monday, to remember that when you look backwards on the past, that disasters aren't just X number of thousand of people dead, that diseases didn't just kill 50,000 people here or 3,800 people here, but that every single person killed was a whole person with a family and a network and a community. And it wasn't just the number of dead that makes a disaster important or memorable or big enough to make it into the historical record, but that it's the impact that the loss of those people have on the other people around them. And so I think one of the things that this is doing for me is in real time, it's modeling for me just how jarring, and it's really making me put myself literally in the place of these people that I've spent time thinking about abstractly, really making me see that. And if we can see, I think as historians, if we can train ourselves to be that compassionate about people in the past, that we can also then train ourselves to be that compassionate about people today. That people aren't numbers, that people are whole people in whole networks, in parts of families and communities.
Dr. Quay?
Yeah, thanks. I guess a couple of things I'd like to say about that. First of all, I've seen a ton of questions coming up here, and they're all really, really good. So that's exciting. And I'm sorry if we're not able to get to all of them today, but we'll, I'm sure, pass these on for. There's going to be much more detailed, in-depth discussion on all of these things and many, many more. And I'll be doing this myself in a couple of weeks. But one of the things that I at least coming out of my own work is that, you know, if you were to give me ask me to do a top 10 of global security threats, pandemic would be in the top 10, but not necessarily number 1, 2, 3, or 4 even. There are other things out there. And there are things right now, every year we have so many children that die of malaria or tuberculosis, as Randy, can well say. Those are preventable and curable diseases. I mean, it's really critical words I just used there, right? And yet it's still happening. Okay, because of water supply issues and so forth, and so part of the dynamic here is that what I get really optimistic about, and why I think this course can be very helpful going forward, is that first of all we can start to disaggregate what are the things that we should be really concerned about. That can help us align our debates, our budgets, and how we prioritize. But secondly, the thing that, as I've looked around global threats for a long time now, every single one of them has a solution. I mean, every single one of these has a human capital-based solution. So it's time for this country to liberate its human capital. We need to think very carefully about the kind of creative talent that we have in this country. And what's amazing is we're all doing it now in our houses. We're all finding our own little liberal arts, whether it's how we're going to teach our kids or how we're going to, sing and dance and make sure we're happy too. Right. And so I think there's just an incredible, essential creative beauty that the arts and humanities also bring to this crisis. And I'm saying that as someone who focuses mainly on national security. But I think that this is critical because this is how you defeat fear. And fear is the real thing. And I'm sure Ellen would also note this with prior pandemics. Fear, lack of knowledge, lack of information can lead to many, many subsequent additional crises that never had to happen in the first place. So reaching out to each other, again, with empathy, understanding, and listening, and love. You know, we don't talk about that enough. But I think we've all been doing that in our hearts in our own little ways as we tried to grapple with this. And I think the opportunities here will be extraordinary. But I also think we're all going to have to be so aware of the sacrifices that are being made right now by our fellow citizens. All of us are, but people are, you know, worried about their jobs. They're worried about having to go to the hospital as an ER worker. So we all need to just make sure we stick with the motto of the course, that we're in this together. And the critical thing is bringing all these interdisciplinary angles is exactly how you would do this if you were working in the Joint Chiefs of Staff or working in a large business or a small business. These are the things that people have to do. So we're all going to have to help each other by challenging assumptions, being respectful and listening, and then getting busy. Let's do it, right? We're America. We can do this stuff.
I guess I'm going to take a few seconds here just to provide a few of my own thoughts. A couple of things that people have brought up in the comments have to do with the relationship between the individual and the society. And I think that another sort of crucial aspect of what we need to rethink at this moment is that relationship between what we owe each other and what we owe to the common good. And I think that, as I think many of you have said today, that we don't that we need to have a better understanding of the ways in which our lives are impacted by others and the way in which they are dependent on what others are doing. And I think that we have shifted in many ways to a society where the individual is sort of paramount. And there are good reasons for that, right? As a political theorist, I can tell you all about why it's really important to protect individual rights. And for the most part, political theorists in the past have not assumed that you can protect individual rights without also thinking about what is in the interest of the community as a whole. And so for me, at least, one of the things that I hope that we get to think through, both in the course and after this, is how we make decisions that are for the interest of everyone and not just for certain sectors. Because there's an irony to thinking about the idea that we're all in this together, because I think, as Professor Quay has pointed out and others, that many people are experiencing this pandemic very differently. And the privilege that we have to come from our own houses and to think through it together is something that others don't always have. And so I'm looking forward to ways that we can think about how we can work with others to, after we get to leave our houses safely, to find ways to build solidarity amongst different communities so that it's not the next sort of crises, we can confront them in ways that don't keep us insulated from each other, but allow us to work together. Let's see. So there are a couple other questions that I'm going to ask us to finish with before I give sort of a brief overview of how the rest of the course is going to go. So one of my favorite questions is, what are some of the needs that you see for college? What's some of the advice that you would give to college age students right now?
I loved that question. I think the biggest thing to recognize right at this exact moment is with college age students is that a lot of them not only had to stop their schooling abruptly and their jobs abruptly, but they also abruptly lost their friendship networks, their new homes, their new communities. And so they're wrestling with not only how to resume work from home, but work from home without all of the other people and places that they were used to calling home. And so I think that part of that is, if you are a parent of a college student and watching this, is that sense of patience with their frustration. If you're a college student and watching this, you'll rebuild that community. This is a temporary disruption. This is your friends are still there. Your learning communities are still there. Your people are there. and you've got finals to study for. No.
I think I was second what Ellen said, and I do also think that for our college students, it's also an opportunity for them to be able to learn, to apply what they've learned within outside the confines of the classroom. I do think that having the opportunity to interact with family members or friends outside an academic setting like this also provides another way for them to be able to appreciate what they have. And that goes a long way to try to help them integrate what they have learned in the classroom to what is out there in terms of a practical experience. Some of them are working, I know, and some of them are also engaged in other kinds of activities like helping others or helping deliver food to people who need it. So all those are good things that engages them and let them know the relevance of a liberal arts education that they are getting and other forms of education as well.
Dr. Quay?
This is such a great question, and it's a hard one actually to answer. I was thinking of it as a parent of college students myself, because I'm seeing it at both angles. I think again, I think being aware and understanding. I think high school seniors, right? They've lived their whole life looking forward to their graduation, and now that's been disrupted. But on the other hand, they're coming up with innovative, creative ways to do that. And that's the beauty of creativity. So we're forced into it, right? We have to do it. So my answer, I guess, would be, this is tough. I mean, we all have to just embrace that. Okay, this is really hard. Okay, it's hard on parents, it's hard on the students, it's hard on young people. But it can be also a beautiful opportunity at the same time as it's also very hard. So what I try to do is at least suggest that, in my classes, we're studying the heck out of this stuff. I mean, we had a lecture on pandemic ready to go, and we didn't really even have to change much. That was similar after 9/11. If there's any students of mine that are here now, they will recall that very well. And then we spent a lot of time debating and arguing about wars, like in Iraq and so forth, right? And very difficult, very painful things. But the fact is, we can look at very difficult things, we can understand them, we can get our head around them, and we can all make a difference at whatever level we think is the right way for us to do that. But the idea is to remain positive. And also, again, I would just keep reaching out to the liberal arts, bring in those humanities, bring in the creativity. Whatever it's painting or dancing or singing or whatever it is, we all need those things just as much as we need to get hard-headed and very realistic about the facts, because that is what opens up our minds towards creativity. And that's how we solve these problems.
Yeah. Great. Thank you everyone so much. I just want to give a quick moment of clarification for what's coming next. You can continue this conversation on our Facebook discussion group, so we encourage you to join us there. There have been lots of great questions in the comments, and we have lots of lectures coming up that'll get into greater detail. As I mentioned, we have Dr. Lori Anderson on Wednesday, April 29th at 4 p.m. And then we have 2 opportunities each week for community members and students to come together to actually get to have a conversation. And so for students, this Thursday at 3 p.m., we'll be having our first Meet the Prof session. And then for community members on Friday, May 1st at 12 p.m., we'll have another opportunity to talk to each other. And make sure you RSVP for those sessions. There should have been a link in the email you got. So that you can sign up. So thank you everyone, and we're really looking forward to learning together with you. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone. This was really fun.
Yeah, thank you.
And it was very nice to see a bunch of people I know in the comments, in the audience. Hi everybody.
Bye.